In 3 days, I'll be back, and everything will be just like it was before, said the unfaithful wife, firmly. Well then, soon she will understand what true eternal hatred really means. A man who lost love, but not his dignity. A daughter who realized too late where the truth truly lay. And a woman who longed for freedom, but never imagined the price would be so high. Late Saturday morning, David sat in his favorite armchair, sipping another mouthful of his drink. The air was filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, soft music played in the background, but none of it lifted his mood. He had hoped to spend the holiday weekend in a relaxed, cozy atmosphere with his wife, but her sudden departure had left him with no plans. The house felt eerily quiet without Lillian. Her idle chatter used to fill the silence, a constant stream of consciousness that rarely meant anything, except to announce her presence. And he admitted, he did the same, it was their shared language of love. She was supposed to return Monday evening, and until then, he had unfinished business. His strange mood kept him from deciding what to do. No tasks, no obligations, none of his usual hobbies or distractions felt right. He knew better than to indulge in daytime drinking, and he didn't want to talk to anyone. So he just sat there, staring into space, occasionally taking another sip, letting his thoughts drift, until the doorbell rang. Opening the door, he was surprised to see his daughter standing on the porch in a long black coat, her face thoughtful. He had considered calling her, but figured a 19-year-old college student wouldn't want to talk to her dad on a Saturday morning, so he'd postponed the idea. In recent years, she had grown closer to Lily than to him, more like friends than mother and daughter, and his conversations with Susanna had become increasingly awkward and distant. He braced himself for the new standard in their relationship, the uncomfortable distance he no longer knew how to bridge. "Hi, Dad," she said, with a forced warmth that didn't reach her eyes. "Hi, Susie," he replied, his voice even. "I wasn't expecting you. Your mom's not here right now, but come in." He stepped aside. "Yeah, I know," she said quietly, walking into the house. He turned away, thinking about the meaning behind her words. Of course she'd spoken to Lily, they talked almost daily, and her sudden appearance, her purpose, was obvious. But was his daughter here as an ally, a mediator, or a flying monkey? Instead, he asked as they walked down the hallway. "Want some coffee?" "Sure," she said, taking off her boots. Lillian had wanted a capsule coffee machine, which Susie had gleefully called snobbish, but David had resisted, preferring the freedom of a regular drip brewer. Eventually, he'd compromised on another small issue, so now he rummaged through the boxes to find her favorite caramel macchiato and turned the machine on. He braced himself as the coffee maker began to hiss. "So, your mom." The words hung in the air for what felt like an eternity. Neither of them knew what to say. "Yeah, Mom," she finally replied, glancing down at the floor and rubbing her neck, as if trying to ease some discomfort. "I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing." David wasn't sure if her behavior was due to the awkwardness of the topic or secondhand embarrassment from what she'd heard. After considering his response, he continued. "Not great," he admitted. It's been rough. Even cruel." She said you didn't really have anything to say about it." "What is there to say?" he asked flatly, loading a second capsule into the machine. She announced she was leaving with some gym rat and ran out the door with a suitcase. The whole thing took 30 seconds. I mean, she was always free to go, but after more than 20 years, I thought I'd get more of a heads up than that. "Oh, yeah, well, she didn't exactly tell it that way, but I mean, it's not that bad. I mean, she's coming back Monday, right? It's just a weekend trip, you know." "It's not just a weekend trip. It's not a couple of days in Vegas with an old friend or a girl's night out. It's 3 days in the same bed, the same intimate space, with another man. However you spin it, that's pretty serious. I guess it's okay that you don't like it, but I don't think it's that bad. I mean, she's not sneaking around behind your back. It's not cheating, that would be awful, but she told you about it, and everyone has the right to be a little selfish sometimes." Susie paused for effect, then added, "She'll be back soon, and everything will go back to how it was," she said confidently, nodding with conviction, a gesture David found almost childlike. Puzzled, he looked at her determined expression for a moment before saying, "I suppose that's one way to look at it. And I'm glad you're handling it so well," she added with a soft, gentle smile. "I was a little worried on the way over that you might be upset. You have no idea how relieved I am to see you taking it so well." He slowly shook his head. "Actually, I'm not okay," he said, then asked, "Do you know how to spot a tsunami?" "What?" she asked, startled by the sudden shift. "The tide pulls way, way back and, never mind. Bad analogy. Anyway, I'm not feeling great right now, and the more I think about it, the worse it gets, let's just say that." With a final hiss, the coffee machine finished its work. David looked at it, wondering whether Lillian would keep it or if he'd end up tossing it out. Then, without a word, he handed the drink to Susie and casually headed back to the living room. David wandered over to his chair and collapsed into it, feeling the warmth of the coffee cup in his hand, while Susie entered the room, talking to herself. "I mean, if you think about it, it's kind of a good thing, like a reset. A way to shake things up and see things from a new perspective." The cup was still warm, he noticed as she carefully settled onto the couch, nudged the cork coaster slightly, and gently placed her drink in front of her. Leaning forward, she asked, "Don't you think?" "No. It's over," he said flatly. "This is the line. We're done." "Done with what?" she asked, confused. He looked her in the eyes, momentarily thrown by her lack of understanding, and ran his free hand along the corduroy armrest before clarifying. "The marriage. Our marriage." He watched her eyes widen, stunned for a moment, then narrow as she said, "What? No. That's an overreaction, Dad. You're just being emotional. You're stressed." Her voice rose slightly, and she quickly added, "It's just a few days, it's not a reason to throw everything away. Once you get some distance from it, you'll see it differently." David leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling for a moment, listening as Susie tried to brush off his feelings. He sighed inwardly, then leaned forward and took another sip of his now lukewarm coffee. Her eyes were fixed on him, waiting for him to speak again, and this time her fake warm smile barely masked her concern. "The thing is, sweetheart, I'm not being emotional. But I will be. I'll be very emotional, probably right after your mom walks through that door Monday night, definitely sometime soon. I'll shatter like glass. But right now, at this moment, I'm cold. I'm ice. I don't feel anything. And that means I can think. And I've thought about this, I've analyzed it both intellectually and emotionally, and everything points to the same conclusion." He looked around the room. Beige. Cream, brown, and beige. Lillian had spent the last few years waging war against the very concept of color. He missed the bright orange couch they'd had 10 years ago. It was unusual, but that wasn't a bad thing. Back then, they both liked it. A harsh thought struck him about the nature of compromise, when there was no middle ground left, and he wondered who would end up living in this dull nightmare, before once again pushing the thought aside. When he glanced back at her, he saw that his daughter's mask had slipped again. Now there was something new on her face, she looked hurt. He wished, just for a moment, that he could feel something. But he didn't. Instead, he tried to explain. "There are basically 3 reasons. Any one of them would be enough. Honestly, you don't need a reason to end a marriage, but I've got at least 3. The first and most obvious is classic infidelity." "No. That's not true," she replied passionately. "We've talked about this, she's not cheating. She told you what she was planning. Sure, it's selfish, but it's not infidelity. She's not hiding anything, she's being honest with you." David gave a dry, ironic smile. "I think you just want that to be true. If I tell your mother I'm going to hit her, does that mean I get to hit her and it's not domestic violence? If I shout, 'This is a robbery,' before pulling a gun, does that mean it's not a bank robbery? What about this, if I tell someone I'm going to kill them, does that make me not guilty of murder, or does it make the sentence worse because of intent?" No, telling me doesn't make it okay. Not when I don't have a choice. But fine, let's say you're right and it's not cheating. I never said it was. I said it was infidelity. That's different. She looked miserable, maybe even a little confused. Actually, she looked very miserable, and she was starting to go pale. Beige. He almost laughed. She matched the decor. Every generation thinks it invented sex, but open relationships have always existed, and the rules haven't changed. She could have asked, and if I'd agreed, it would have been fine. But she didn't. Fidelity, literal fidelity, means sticking to the agreement. We both agreed to put each other first, or at least second. Lily put me third. She broke her vow, openly and carelessly, and that's a direct and serious betrayal. No, Susie said quietly. No. It's just a weekend, Dad. She's coming back. I mean, even if it is what you say, you could forgive her. It's just a few days, Anne. She trailed off. David watched her hands, twisting together like snakes trying to calm themselves, her white knuckles revealing the strength hidden in the gesture. Don't forget your coffee. It's going to get cold, he said indifferently, remembering her overly sweet packet drink. Anyway, people misunderstand what marriage really is. They get caught up in the ceremony, the party, the outfits, and all that junk. But marriage is a solemn vow, and once that vow is broken, it's over. Technically speaking, our marriage ended a long time ago. All that's left is paperwork. Please. That's not true, Dad, she replied, this time in a quiet voice. You can forgive her. Things can be good again. Maybe I could, if it were a one-time thing. But it's not. Like I said, cheating isn't just a physical act, it's the choice to break your word. If she got drunk, tripped, and fell onto a dick, I think I could get past that. People make mistakes. Honestly, yeah, I could definitely move on if there was some remorse. But this is a full-blown affair, and it's been going on for a while. What? No, it's a one-time thing. Mom would have told me, Dad. Think about it, she told you before she did it, didn't she? Told me, he asked, sadness creeping into his voice. Okay. Let's go with that. Let's say she hasn't slept with him yet. Let's pretend this isn't a semi-serious attempt to legitimize her affair before I find out. Sure, we can do that. I mean, why go away for the whole weekend when you could just have a date on a stained mattress in a one-bedroom bachelor pad that smells like sweat and dirty socks? Susie recoiled in disgust, shaking her head furiously. Instead, it's going to be the full girlfriend experience, he shrugged. That means it started with infatuation, an obsessive thought she didn't resist, followed by a series of increasingly poor decisions, flirting, lingering touches, all of it. He gestured with his hand to emphasize each phrase. Eventually, it led to booking a hotel room, reserving a table at a nice restaurant, maybe buying a dress and lingerie, and plenty of giggling and hand-holding leading up to the main event. This wasn't a sudden, impulsive decision, it took time and effort to plan. Your mother's carefully orchestrated departure is the climax of a months-long affair that started long before she walked out the door on Friday. No, Dad, I said that's not true. In the end, it doesn't really matter. Lillian's having fun, and her sleazy lover gets his prize for the weekend. If either of them cared about the consequences, this wouldn't be happening. She insisted. Brad's not like that, her voice too firm, as if she were trying to convince herself more than him. David found Susie's sudden burst of indignation and wounded pride oddly charming. He's sweet, polite, handsome, and, just because he's a personal trainer doesn't mean he's not a gentleman. He's not that sweet if he's hitting on married clients at work, David countered, noting just how much Susie seemed to know about her mother's lover. First of all, that's unprofessional. And second, are you really sure nothing's happened between them? We all want to look good in front of others, Susie. Do you really think your mother never embellishes the truth when she tells you about her day? Maybe leaving out a few stolen moments of passion here and there, or skipping over the more scandalous details. 3 days of premeditated, uninterrupted intimacy is a strange way to start an affair. No, you're wrong. She didn't do that. She wouldn't. She said she wouldn't. That's why she told you, Dad, so it would be okay. She wasn't going to wait until the last minute, but she did tell you, so I know she didn't do it. David raised an eyebrow and said. Well, maybe you're right, though it doesn't make much sense to me. People lie a lot, Susanna, and they lie to themselves even more. It's not cheating, it's just a kiss. Did she tell you about her first kiss with him? About what it felt like when his hand slid up her skirt? He watched as Susanna slowly shook her head. No. Did she really tell her daughter about the first time she took him in her hand? Or in her mouth? I doubt it, because it's easier to say, it doesn't count if you never say what it actually was. The more the lie is repeated, the more the line shifts, until it disappears completely. Because the truth. Admitting the truth makes you the bad guy. Either way, the betrayal started a long time ago. After a moment of silence, David added. Just like your part in it, apparently. He watched her mouth slowly fall open in horror, one hand rising to cover it in a near-comical slow-motion gesture. David barely resisted the urge to laugh. No, not laugh. Chuckle. This couldn't be happening. Not yet. He looked at Susanna, frozen like a puppet, and said. Let's not talk about this. Just, don't. It's too late anyway. David sighed again. He'd been sighing a lot lately. After some thought, he decided it was probably for the best. Better than the alternatives, at least for now. Your mother doesn't love me anymore, he told her. She didn't respond right away, and he figured the emotional shock was probably too much, so he waited. In a very quiet voice, muffled slightly by her hand pressed to her mouth, Susanna finally said. That's not true. That's not true. I'm afraid it is. It's painfully clear. It's not true. Look, I'm not blind. Your mother's well put together, attractive, even, especially for 43. Over the years, she's met countless horny idiots who didn't care that she was married. She could have cheated on me at any time. For years, she pushed those men away when they tried to cross the line. She valued our love and didn't want to risk it. Now she doesn't. He paused, but Susanna didn't react. In fact, he wasn't entirely sure she was listening, her eyes were slightly unfocused, but he continued. What Lillian did yesterday, dropping that obvious, hurtful bomb and walking out. That was, like you said, selfish. No concern for my feelings or how deeply I'd be hurt. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she didn't care. That was an act of apathy, the opposite of love. That's not true, she said mechanically. Yes, it is. Anyway, as you go through life, you'll find that people assign you roles. We all do it. Best friend, lover, confidant, father, at one point or another, I was all of those things to your mother. At some point, I think I shifted in her mind from lover to father. Now you're her confidant, and once you moved out, my role as father ended. Her lover now, apparently, is your buddy Brad. And after what happened yesterday, I'm pretty sure best friend doesn't apply anymore either. Seems like I don't have a role at all. That's not true, she repeated. David saw her eyes fill with tears and suspected she was quietly crying. If things got worse, he'd have to stop and wait for her to calm down. After all, he still had a parental duty. Maybe his last. When you suddenly announce you're going off for a wild weekend of indulgence, that's something you do to a roommate, someone who splits bills with you, an acquaintance, maybe a casual friend at best. No, if she loved me, she would have sacrificed her little adventure to spare my feelings. She would have stopped it before it even began. So she doesn't love me. And that's that. And then the sobbing began. Susanna said something, well, she tried to say something, but it was unintelligible, and David watched as she curled up, almost in a fetal position, and began to rock gently. It was strange not to feel anything. As if Susanna were feeling a small piece of his pain for him, a strange sensation. He took another sip of his coffee, but it had gone cold and tasted even more bland and unpleasant than before. Still, he had time. Susanna, clearly, was going to be useless for a while, so he decided to make himself a fresh cup. Maybe with extra sugar. Today might be a good day to try something sweet. The mechanical motions of operating the old coffee machine were oddly soothing, and the rhythmic noises and bubbling sounds it made were comforting in the cool stillness of the kitchen. Personally, he only used the capsules for artificial espresso, never quite understanding why people who didn't like coffee bought coffee machines. Watching it work gave him time to think about how to approach the next step, the unwanted, additional step, but one that, apparently, he needed to take now. After one short sip, he confirmed that the extra sugar had been a good choice. By the time he returned, Susanna seemed to have calmed down a bit. She was still rocking slightly, but her body no longer shook with sobs, so it seemed she had at least partially pulled herself together. David noticed, in passing, that she didn't look at him when he walked in, but he hadn't expected her to. Sitting down again, he finally said, "It's a little disappointing to learn you were involved in all this," he added. "That's going to be hard to forgive." "Dad." "It's okay. I'll get through it. Anyway, you've pretty much cut me out of your life these past few years, so after a while you'll barely notice the difference," he added. "In a couple of weeks, I'll probably hate you. In 6 months, maybe a year, you'll be dead to me. But after that, everything will be fine. You may not care about your father anymore, but you'll always be my little girl. I'll just pretend that's still true." She made a strange sound, sharper and rougher than a sob. "In the end, part of the blame is mine. I know empty nest syndrome is real, but I never said out loud, 'Please don't start an affair,' or 'Don't forget I'm a real person with real feelings,' not once. I certainly never asked Lillian not to rip my still beating heart out of my chest and crush it in front of me, so yeah, this is definitely my fault." He paused for a moment and said, "It's going to be strange seeing her on Monday. People look at their partners with love. They don't see laugh lines or slight changes in figure, they just see, sort of, an idealized version of them. When I looked at my wife, she was still 20. Well, something like that. It's something you'll experience one day. But when your mother walks in, that'll probably be the end of it. I'll see a middle-aged stranger. I think that'll be the moment when everything becomes real, Susanna." "I can fix this, Dad," she whispered, though David understood it was more for herself than for him. "No," he said sadly, with more emotion than he expected. "No, I don't think you can. There are things you just can't get back, no matter what you do. The best you can do is try to learn something from it and move forward." Standing up, he said, "I think it's time for you to go. Can you drive?" Looking down at the floor, she nodded, and as she shuffled toward the front door, he placed a hand on her shoulder, consciously trying to comfort her. As she stepped back out into the world, she turned to face him, her eyes misty. "Eventually," he said. "It's a shame you didn't tell me. Things like this die in daylight." Slowly, studying him, her face twisted, and she cried out in a broken voice. "I'll call Mom. I'll fix this. I'll bring her back." She yanked her phone from her coat pocket and accidentally flung it across the driveway. David wondered if she was even capable of understanding how final everything already was. Probably not, he thought, but he tried. "Don't," he said, watching her stumble. "There's no point. It's been, 18 hours since she left. That's plenty of time for shame, guilt, or regret to show up, if it was ever going to. Lillian's probably still telling herself she'll get through this once she's tried Brad a few times, if she's thinking about me at all. Either she won't believe you, or you'll just ruin her fun. Better to let her enjoy the weekend." "I'll fix it," she repeated, trying to retrieve her phone from the ground. Now she was on all fours, but David didn't laugh at Susanna's awkwardness. She was too blurred, and his face was too wet. Instead, he gently closed the door. "Goodbye, Susanna." "Goodbye, David." For Susie, time froze in the fog. She blinked, and the road changed. The truck in front of her suddenly became an SUV, then a sedan. Road signs she wasn't supposed to see yet flashed past her eyes. Where had the last 20 miles gone? Nothing made sense. He had been so calm, but he was wrong, and she told him so, but he just kept talking, and the words weren't what she expected. They started to make sense, and that was bad. But then they turned into hammer blows. Little shards of fear and pain she had no answer for. Then somehow she was outside, and he was just looking at her with that face, that awful face, and she told him everything would be okay, but then it became unbearable, and he cried, and he closed the door, and it felt like a verdict. That was when she felt she had done something wrong. Something terrible. But she hadn't done anything. Everything would be fine if she could just call Mom. But when she tried, the words came out wrong. She wanted to tell her to come home, to help Dad, but she didn't answer. The voicemail beeped, and she said, what did she say? There was a scream. Why scream? Why did she do that? Mom couldn't fix this. She blinked again and took the exit into slow city traffic. Stop and go. Did she turn the right way? Someone honked, and the light was green, then red again. He called her Susanna. He never calls her Susanna, always Susie, sweetheart, honey, or my girl. Susie had to pull over for a minute and accidentally blocked a bus stop while her fists pounded helplessly on the steering wheel. Someone was yelling again. She wasn't even sure who they were yelling at, but her phone still hadn't rung. She checked, maybe she missed the call. She sent another message. Call me. It joined the others, the list disappearing off the top of the screen. She was fine. She must have parked near the house. She came back safe. Everything was fine. That stupid woman, had she lied? Dad said she lied, and Susie started to think he was right, and that things weren't fine. She opened the door, and Maddie turned and looked at her strangely. Her roommate Maddie, sweet, funny Madison, and she tried to tell Maddie about the awful thing, but collapsed to her knees. Come here. It was a good hug. They wrapped her in a blanket, and the pain didn't go away, but Maddie kept asking questions with a sad, serious face. Oh God. He said he hated her. At some point, soup appeared, but her hands were shaking too much to eat it. It spilled everywhere. Maddie told her it was okay, but Susie really liked that coat, and now it was ruined too. Stained, like everything else. She stayed there for hours, but eventually fell asleep on the couch in tears. When Susie woke up, it was already dark, and Maddie was gone. She was alone again. She didn't feel better, but she felt different. Cleaner. No, she corrected herself, not cleaner. She was still stained. But now she could see the dirt. The stains. That cruel, selfish, thoughtless, disgusting. That stupid slut. Why had she ever listened to her? Those selfies with her hot gym friend, the questions about what Susie thought of Brad's looks. The little details and jokes, just friendly flirting, just harmless infatuation, just something your dad shouldn't know, something he wouldn't understand. But Dad had told her the truth. And she met him. She wanted to. She laughed with Mom about how handsome, muscular, and fit he was, that smug bastard. And still, she didn't say anything. Then it became romantic, and it was our little secret, and meaningless fun, and finally, a fun weekend. Something to break the boredom. And only then did she think maybe it had gone too far. But even then, she didn't say anything. She trusted her, trusted that she'd do the right thing. She said she would. She promised. And Susie believed her. But now Susie felt different. There was fire inside her, and she wondered if Dad felt it too. She felt closer to him than she had in years, but then remembered he couldn't be further away. That's when she started remembering yesterday correctly. Everything Dad said came back in flashes. How disappointed he was. She wanted to cry again, maybe she was crying, she didn't know, but she needed to pull herself together and get some real sleep. She undressed as she walked across the room and collapsed onto her bed, but sleep didn't come. Fine, she thought. She didn't deserve it. Instead, she wrapped herself in a blanket and stared into space. The soft warmth of the bed was a weak comfort, but at that moment, it was the only thing holding her together, and it wasn't enough. Her mood worsened with every second, and she replayed the last year in her head. She had let Dad down and made so many mistakes, not just this one. Every little insult she could remember, every time Mom told her not to worry about what Dad thought. Every poisonous whisper. She didn't even think they were intentional, and that was the scariest part. Mom. Mom had stopped taking Dad seriously. He was just there. And Mom had convinced her to see him the same way. To take him for granted. It wasn't Susie's fault. It was her mother's. She knew that wasn't true, deep down, but if she tried really, really hard, she could almost believe it. When the sun came up, she tried calling again, straight to voicemail. She kept trying, despite Dad's advice, even knowing it was hopeless. Maybe, just maybe, Mom could do something. If that was true, it had to happen now, before the last scraps of Dad's love vanished forever. Every hour, straight to voicemail. Maddie checked in around lunchtime and practically dragged her out of bed, put her in pajamas, and insisted she eat something. It was just strawberry jam sandwiches, but it was something, and now that she'd calmed down, she told Maddie about the conversation with her dad. Maddie's judgment was brutal in its simplicity. Looks like you both really screwed everything up. Susie couldn't help but agree, at least now, but the rage she felt toward herself was nothing compared to the growing fury she felt toward her mother, a fury she had to consciously suppress. After that, Maddie laid her down on the couch, no soup this time, wrapped her in a blanket again, and they half-watched a meaningless marathon of reality shows about cheaters while talking. Maddie shared some things about herself that Susie hadn't known before, things she said didn't concern anyone but her. It turned out the house Maddie grew up in was, in her words, a tomb dedicated to her parents' marriage, though it hadn't always been that way. Around age 9, her mom moved into the guest room. She was young enough to think it was normal, but old enough to remember how things used to be. From that moment on, there was always a chill in the air, beneath the surface of polite indifference, masked by warmth and empty chatter her parents maintained for her sake. She'd asked why many times, but they never wanted to go into detail. Only at a family gathering when she was 15 did she manage to corner her slightly drunk Aunt Stacy, her mom's sister, who secretly told her about a few of her dad's affairs. After that, everything made sense. They split the day Maddie left for college, and she was glad. So her advice was simple, but not very useful. Some things are meant to end. So don't get involved. It's better not to interfere. Susie couldn't do that, but she promised, at least, not to do anything that might make things worse. Not intentionally, anyway. She'd try to be better. By the end of that Sunday evening, she had tried calling her mother another dozen times, and the fire of resentment and pain that had taken hold of her heart began to forge something inside her. When she finally crawled into bed, she didn't feel better, and she didn't want to sleep. A grim mood haunted her, seeping into her soul. She knew she had to do something, anything, to fix this. She had told Dad she could fix it. She checked the app to see if there were any replies to her desperate messages. All of them were still marked as unread. Carefully, one by one, Susie deleted all the unread messages from the chat. Instead, she sent a new one. You need to talk to Dad. She made one last call to that woman, one last attempt, and, like before, no one answered. That stupid bitch was still living in her vile, disgusting little fantasy. Well, she had tried. She had tried too much. She was done. Something intangible but important quietly snapped inside her, and a distant, monolithic, yet inexplicable tension disappeared. There was only one way left to fix things, even just a little, but it was going to hurt. Until yesterday, Susie hadn't even known you could choose a side. Turns out, she'd chosen one years ago, but here's the thing, she chose the wrong side. And she wasn't going to make that mistake again. From now on, she was with Dad. To the end. Even if he didn't want her around anymore. Even if they never shared another genuine moment for the rest of their lives. It was the least she could do after everything. He was the only person she could hope to help now, so she called him, just in case. He didn't answer either. So she left him alone. That was okay, or at least Susie desperately hoped it was okay. It had to be. After all, she couldn't go back, not yet. He'd made that clear enough. So she would move forward. He needed space, he'd get it. And she needed to prove she was still worth something. Not just a wet hole, like her dad had called that woman. She would be more. A few minutes later, she sent that woman one more message. "I'll be busy with school for a while. We'll talk later." That was enough, for now, until she could speak to her father again. Then she could do the right thing. Eventually, sleep came. And on Monday morning, her eyes opened with resolve. The message was still unread, and her mood solidified. Her mind was no longer filled with cotton, and her vision was clear. The feeling that had slowly wrapped around her like a shroud had hardened into something sharp, and for the first time in her short life, she truly, fully understood what eternal hatred felt like. It was a holiday weekend, and she had somehow wasted 2 precious days of Maddie's time on her own foolishness, bless her, so now she had to show she was okay, that she was holding it together. She decided to make the most of the time left, to go out and pretend to have fun, and then, like a good girl, get back to her coursework. One way or another, she'd squeeze something useful out of this and move forward, just like Dad told her to. She didn't rush getting ready. For breakfast, Susanna had plain oatmeal. She brushed her teeth, showered, and blow-dried her hair. She applied makeup carefully, something she often skipped, not to look more attractive, not to stand out, but as a mask. It used to be a game, a playful way to present herself to the world, but now it had a different purpose, and the girl beneath the mask looked tired. Used. Gradually, she gave her face a natural look, using concealer to hide the dark circles under her eyes, a touch of highlighter to fake a healthy glow, a bit of mascara, and a sheer gloss on her lips. Finally satisfied that what lay beneath had been successfully buried, and feeling just a little more human, she gave a short, sharp nod to the stern-faced woman in the mirror. She heard movement in the apartment. Good, Maddie was up. Her friend had been her rock these past 2 days, and she owed her for that. She'd go to her and say thank you. There was only today left before they returned to college, but they could do something together, go wherever Maddie wanted, somewhere she could be a friendly person. She could smile and laugh easily for Maddie and make this one remaining day light and pleasant. It would be good practice. Choosing an outfit wasn't easy. Every piece of underwear felt obscene. Every lacy, minimalist thing screamed her lack of decency. Indecent scraps that barely counted as clothing. Exactly what she deserved, the fitting reward. Thin and vulgar. Available. Slutty. It took time to make a precise choice, but after selecting the most humiliating set, she began searching for something to hide it. She couldn't cut the legacy of that woman out of her cursed body, those toxic, unwanted genes, but she could bury them in darkness. Only what showed on the surface mattered, and it would take something special to contain what lay beneath, to keep the world from piercing the illusion. That was the most important thing. But the wardrobe betrayed her. It was full of frivolous, casual, loud things, not enough real clothing. She gave up for now and settled on a pair of jeans and a beige blouse, but where was the practical outfit that said she meant business? Even the shoes were a disaster, too many teenage sneakers, and the shiny heels weren't much better. Completely unreasonable, but at least the high heels might be useful now, given the constant discomfort reminding her of her worth. Why didn't she own anything formal in black? Finally satisfied that she had made some progress toward a decent appearance, she examined the final result in the mirror. None of it was good enough, but it was something she could work on later, when she built a real wardrobe. Feeling like she had scraped off a tiny particle of the thick, secret grime that covered her, fully composed and ready to face the world, she picked up her phone again. Squinting, Susanna tapped the contact. Block. Epilogue. The chapel was bathed in a joyful, almost golden light. Susanna felt it didn't match the occasion. Funerals should be solemn, gray, somber, and she quietly said so to her husband Miles as they arrived. At least the flowers were appropriate, white lilies. They had met late and married later, but that wasn't her fault. She had focused on her career, on achieving something, and while there had been others, none had taken her seriously. She wasn't going to be a useless leech, a smiling housewife. Only Miles had done the right thing. He believed her at her word. When her father called to give his blessing, she finally understood, he was the one. She smiled at him with a brief flicker of warmth, remembering that moment, before leaving both of their lanky teenagers in his care. She turned gracefully toward the casket, paused to adjust the lines of her blazer and pencil skirt, then stepped forward with purpose. Each strike of her heels echoed sharply on the hardwood floor as she walked to say goodbye in person before the ceremony began. Despite appearances, this was the third saddest moment of her life. Second place, by a narrow margin, belonged to the coldness of her little child, her poor, sweet little Mariana, but even that was far from the day he last truly spoke to her. He had been there for dozens of important moments, both joyful and painful, had walked her down the aisle, had been present at the birth of each of her precious children, but they had never truly talked again. Not like that. Not honestly, not since it happened. She had tried so hard, but he had been right. There are things you can't come back from, and all you can do is learn from them. She placed her hands on the edge, hoping not to stain the white silk lining, which felt too pure, too innocent for her fingers to touch. She looked at him, feeling utterly helpless in the face of death. After a while, the woman joined her, stood beside her, and looked down at her father too. Without lifting her eyes, the unwanted, uninvited guest softly said, "I'm so sorry, Susie." The words hung in the air for a moment before Susanna turned to her, freeing one hand while gripping the edge of the casket with the other like a live wire. Then her face came alive, twisted with the horror of what she'd heard. "Never again. Never again," she screamed at her mother, her eyes instantly gleaming with rage. Lillian recoiled in shock as a large drop of spit landed on her face. "You don't get to call me that," the daughter shouted, stepping forward. "No one does, especially not you. Never." She pointed at the corpse. "Not until he does." Lily's face went pale. She knew they had reconciled only for the sake of the grandchildren, but in that moment, she forgot the distance between them. She still didn't understand why that little detail mattered so much, but she knew she shouldn't have said it. "I'm sorry, Susanna," she said with quiet submission. "Forgive me." She watched helplessly as her Susie spun on her heels and ran down the aisle, stumbling past the gathered mourners, her face twisted in grief at the memory of words that would never be spoken. The crowd of mourners silently observed them both with a mix of curiosity and shock. Miles handed his mother-in-law a handkerchief before hurrying after his wife. It wasn't supposed to end like this, Lily thought sadly, wiping the wetness from her cheek, overwhelmed by the tangle of emotions threatening to drown her. For just a moment, she saw her little girl again, and each time she did, it was precious in its own way. The Susanna she showed the world was commanding, confident, always composed and poised. But Susie. What remained of her precious Susie was wild, but even then, her rage was better than nothing. If it ended anywhere, it ended when she turned off her phone. She had just wanted to sink into the moment, to shut out the rest of the world for a couple of days of meaningless fun, so she shared her excitement in a 2-minute call with Susie, and then powered down the device for the weekend. What followed was supposed to be a break, a simple pause, and it didn't count. Her real life resumed only after that simple glance from David when she returned to their home. It wasn't their home anymore, but she hadn't known that. Not then. It was an empty look. Not a smile, not a frown, not even anger, none of the expressions she had grown used to receiving from him. Just a vaguely dismissive glance from reddened eyes. Of course, she had expected some coldness, so she ignored it and went upstairs to unpack. Then she turned her phone back on, and there were only 2 texts and one distorted, unintelligible voicemail. Nothing from David, which was a bit surprising. She had almost expected an essay. One of the things that had first drawn her to him was the way he could, over time, dissect poorly thought-out opinions with surgical precision. She had seen him casually dismantle people just by repeating their own words back to them, rephrased to sound strange, monstrous, or foolish. It was one of the reasons she left the way she did. She didn't want to give him time. Time to think, to reflect, to convince her not to go. But he gave her nothing. And she had taken that as acceptance, with relief. Yes, she had been distracted, too caught up in fresh memories of her little adventure, but sometimes, in the crueler, more self-punishing thoughts that came when sleep wouldn't, she noticed what was missing in his gaze, and imagined doing something else. Throwing herself at him. Begging. Making promises. Telling terrible lies, anything. But it didn't happen. Lily gave a weak smile to both of her grandchildren, trying to reassure them that everything was okay. After all, funerals are a time when emotions run high. Their mother would be back soon, and no one would judge her for a burst of anger. Not here. Not now. Susie had always been too strict with the kids, too demanding. Lily often conspired quietly with Miles to spoil them. It was all she could do under the circumstances, and Susie allowed it. The harmless, caring grandmother seemed to be what she considered appropriate. A moment later, Lily turned back to the casket. Afterward, she returned to domestic life as if nothing had happened. Some things changed immediately. David slept in the guest room, saying he needed some distance. He would get through it. She went back to the gym, and Brad was there, as flirty as ever. He made it clear he wanted more, and she pretended to hesitate, but looking back, the real answer had already been yes. She wasn't going to tell David, not this time. Something casual and secret could be exciting, and telling him had been a mistake. There was no point in inviting coldness again just for a little pleasure. And honestly, Brad lacked depth, no real conversations, nothing to build a lasting, meaningful connection. He was better in small doses. Outside the bedroom, he became tiresome by day 3, and when the weekend ended, it was almost a relief. Much better to limit their time together to a few hours at a time, that would keep the passion alive. That was the point, after all, just a distraction from the dull, repetitive routine she'd found herself in. An escape. She'd talked to Susie about it once she was free. Everything started to shift a few days later, on Wednesday morning, when she was in the kitchen making coffee. David walked in, patiently waiting in silence to do the same. Without looking, she casually reached out to take his hand. She felt him flinch, as if she'd burned him, as if every fingertip stung like a wasp. The feeling struck her too, and it was the first moment she began to wake up from her sweet little dream. At first, she managed to brush it off, but that night, lying alone in bed, sleep didn't come easily. Eventually, she realized she had hurt him. And that day, she started noticing the little things, and missing them. David didn't kiss her, not even a peck. He didn't hug her, not even lightly, and barely spoke to her, except for a few mumbled words. She desperately needed to talk to Susie, but after that short vacation, she still wasn't answering calls. For some reason, her messages remained unread, and Lillian began to feel truly alone. But after that, she understood. The subtle changes in his mood when she entered the room, his clipped responses to her chatter, the distance, and the way he stayed silent in her presence. Their interactions became mechanical, and he wasn't there. Not for her. By the next day, she decided to make a gesture, a generous one, to show she still cared. She took the path of least resistance and switched gyms. Getting a new membership was easy enough, though canceling the old one was its own ordeal. She had to explain everything to Brad and ask for help with the paperwork, and he was as helpful as ever, even offering her one last chance, playfully slapping her backside, but she declined, regretfully. When she proudly announced it Thursday night, David's response, "Okay," was underwhelming. She had expected a little more for her effort, even just a little, but she kept trying. She dressed nicely for him, wore makeup, smiled when he looked her way. She asked small questions about his day, about what he was working on. She tried to engage him in a dozen different ways. Despite all that, things didn't improve. A few days later, her nightmare truly began, with those awful words, "We need to talk." He spoke a lot, and so did she, but they talked at each other, not with each other. For the first and last time, he wielded that surgical blade she had once admired, and spoke to her about love, trust, and respect. In the end, he laughed in her face when she tried to argue that it was all unfair, that he couldn't just say it was over and walk away. He had to give her a chance. It was a loud, chest-deep laugh that seemed to go on forever, cruel and cutting, and then he left. That same day, her daughter finally found time to speak to her, and she already knew. When Lily said it felt like betrayal, Susie laughed too, but it was a manic kind of laugh. The whole thing was a bad joke, but every time Lily remembered it, she didn't feel like laughing. She didn't fight him on the divorce, because honestly, she never really cared about that. In the end, it was just stuff. Instead, when the dust settled, what remained between them was something strange and distant. Not close, it never had been, but it was something. Something familiar. In the end, it was his last loving gift to her. It took a long time to accept it, to move on, or even to understand that when she reached for him, David would no longer be there. Eventually, she realized she had handled it all very poorly from the start, but David had been wrong too, at least about one thing. In the end, she wasn't here for Susie. Susanna, she corrected herself. She knew she would only be tolerated here, never truly accepted, after all the reckless things she had done. Still, she had come, only for him. Leaning over the casket, Lily did what she had wanted to do for 30 years, something she could only do now, because he no longer had a say in the matter. She gently placed her hand into David's. It was colder than she would have liked, but it had to be. She knew she was being selfish again, but just this once, in this one brief moment at the very end of everything, she could be with him. "Goodbye, David."